Good morning, everyone. It's really so great to be here with all of you and to see your faces. Solidarity to each and every one of you. I'd like to recognize at the start of this the ancestral, territorial, and traditional lands on which we live, learn, organize, and come together today in solidarity. Allow me to start by recognizing the exceptional leadership of Gavin, your Western Regional Director. Brother, you are relentless and tenacious in the pursuit of justice for workers, pushing forward against some of the most hard-headed and anti-worker conservative governments in Canada, and demanding that friendly governments be bold for once in their lives and deliver for workers. And your determination has led to gains for workers in the toughest of times. Gavin, thank you very much for all you do. The lesson from the West, of course, is clear. No matter the political stripe of the government, our collective goal must be to build our power as a union, as a workers' movement, as a critical, progressive, and powerful force in the democracy of our nation, starting in our workplaces. We can't depend on governments or employers doing what we need them to do. If we didn't know this before the pandemic, we certainly know it now. It's a reminder to all of us as trade unionists that no gain is given, but taken because of the courage of workers, because we fought for it, all of them, on a picket line, organized for it, or waged a campaign that captured the hearts and minds of our members. This has also been true throughout this past year. We organized. Organizing cannot merely be something we do with just new members, but a core act of our union work each and every day. And to do that, we must ensure we are creating space for all workers for the struggles and campaigns that we must wage. Women, Black, Indigenous, workers of color, young workers, LGBTQ2S workers, and workers with different abilities. There must be space for everyone in our fight for a more just world. And we must ensure our demands at both the political and collective bargaining tables are inclusive and deliver on this broader goal of full equality. It's not just about changing the conditions of work, but the conditions of the world. Our movement and our union must be unflinching in building solidarity. Our demands and campaigns for gender and racial justice are essential to living up to the promise of this union. Remember, friends, it's really okay to look back and review why we created Unifor. It's okay to ask ourselves, have we lived up to those promises and commitments to each other? It's okay to say we must do better, because all of these things are necessary to actually being better, to being a union for everyone. Remember why we created Unifor in the first place. It was an act of hope, but even more than that, it was an act of solidarity, that we could build something different, and through our activism, a better world would be possible. I want to thank the Prairie Council Executive and Standing Committees for your work over this past term. Our grassroots regional structures are crucial to building the kind of relevant and inclusive fighting union we need from coast to coast. I also want to thank our staff in the Prairie region, led by our area directors, Andrea and Paul, for your tireless work on behalf of our members during what has been the most difficult of years for all of us. Thank you for being there for our members. Friends, we come from different workplaces, different communities, and different provinces. Gender, race, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, telecom workers, energy workers, librarians, forestry and educational support workers. We build planes and buses, clean hotel rooms, deliver people and important goods and services by road, rail, and air. We vote for different political parties. Yet despite these borders and differences, there is something very powerful that connects all of us, that binds us. We are workers, we are trade unionists, and we believe in a different kind of world. It is our experiences as workers and our trade union principles that unite us. It is our ability to understand that human rights are for all, not the privileged few. We live in a world that is growing more and more unequal. This pandemic has worsened that condition. And yet our inspired fight for worker justice is gaining momentum. Every victory this year is a reminder that we must never give up, no matter how tough the moment is, no matter the setbacks. Imagine for one moment, sisters, if we gave up on our fight for pay equity and universal childcare, if we gave up on our fight to end violence and sexism, to have full reproductive justice, where would we be? Where would the world be? Instead, we persisted, and we must continue to persist, even when we want to scream at the everyday sexism and harassment we still face. Scream, yes, but organize too. This pandemic has opened the eyes of the world to injustice, to racism in ways they were not before. It has opened the eyes of the world to the obscene wealth of the very few. Unfettered capitalism driving income inequality is a poison. In no world should the wealth be so concentrated in the hands of so few. And it is no coincidence that this growing inequality has happened while unions are under attack. During this pandemic, billionaires saw their wealth skyrocket here in Canada and in the United States. Unfettered capitalism has given us Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, private long-term care, hedge funds, exploitation, climate, racial, and gender injustice. And it has funded an attack on union rights around the globe. And in this pandemic, in too many cases, capitalism was put first, ahead of the health of the world's citizens. And yet we persist, despite their power, despite their wealth. One of our campaigns during this pandemic has been for paid sick days. Imagine having to fight for paid sick days during a global pandemic. Paid sick days should be a minimum, a given. Paid sick days should be a basic human right. The fact that governments have failed to act on this very basic demand until 15 months into a pandemic says a lot about their priorities. The message is clear: workers are disposable. Yet, it has been workers, many of them women in healthcare and on the front lines, who have lifted the world up this past year. Working 47 days straight, living in a camper outside their long-term care workplace because governments have failed them so badly, putting profit before patient and worker safety. They are exhausted, my friends. Katha Forche will tell you, living in fear that they will infect their families and friends, desperate to protect the elderly in their care. We owe them, and we must fight with them until they have won decent work and fair pay. Friends, on the one hand, Canadian billionaires saw their wealth increase by $78 billion in the last year. $78 billion. And on the other hand, 5.5 million Canadians lost their jobs or had their hours at work cut in half. The Weston family, Canada's grocery store giants, I think Jerry spoke about them yesterday, saw their profits and wealth increase by billions while they slashed pandemic pay for grocery store workers who risked their health and lives every single day. As we say in Newfoundland, my home province, it's enough to make your blood boil. Canada's 87 richest families on average have 4,448 times more wealth than the typical family. Together, these 87 families hold more wealth than the bottom 12 million Canadians combined. Make no mistake, we were never in this pandemic together. There was always an us and them. There were always two pandemics. Just ask the families of the 10 Unifor members who have died from this virus because of their work. ask the families of the 25,000 and counting Canadians who've been lost to this virus. Workers, many of them racialized, and seniors. Friends, our politicians have let us down. They have failed us. They had one job in this pandemic: public health. Most of them ignored sound and informed advice. They ignored science. They ignored common sense. Some of them, like Jason Kenney, continued to rip up workers' rights, including health and safety rights, rather than focus on attacking this virus. Their incompetence and ideology should make us all angry, and that anger must be the fuel for the kind of mobilizing it will take to come out of this with something better. We must never forget the lessons of this pandemic. We must never forget how we had to fight for the lives and livelihoods of our members and for workers everywhere, for basic PPE, for fairness and safe work. We must never forget the cracks this pandemic has further exposed in our social safety net, in our lack of industrial policies that build and keep good jobs in Canada, including strong manufacturing jobs. I know all of you may be feeling a little tired, but these injustices must give us the strength to continue our work. We must also never forget the kind of work we did as a union facing the most challenging of times in our history. We must be that kind of union into the future. We have faced financial and economic shocks before, but nothing like this pandemic, nothing that was such a risk to the lives and health and safety of our members, our loved ones, and our neighbors. A once-in-a-century crisis. As your Secretary Treasurer, I knew we had to plan for the worst-case scenario if our union was going to survive as a strong, vibrant, relevant force for the long term. We could not allow the pandemic to weaken our ability to fight for our members, for workers, because we knew our members would need us more than ever, and the world would need the work of unions more than ever. 15 months into this pandemic, and we're not out of it yet. We see how it has disproportionately impacted racialized workers and communities, magnifying all the inequities so prevalent in our economic and social systems. It is our job to change the conditions that underline these inequalities. This is true of the world as we see poor countries and the global south completely devastated by this virus with little access to vaccines or adequate health care. Canada can do something about this by supporting the lifting of vaccine patents so we can vaccinate the world more quickly. I know this pandemic has not been easy for any of you, workplace leaders, trade union activists, local presidents, shop stewards. You have been on the front lines, fighting for our members every single day during the worst of times. Many of you are volunteers, and Jerry and I are forever in your debt for your determination and representation at the workplace level. Be proud of your trade union work. We are a stronger union because of you and because of this experience this past year. I think back to March when we established our internal COVID task force and the daily calls with reports of mass shutdowns and layoffs. Within 2 weeks, 1/3 of our membership was out of work. They were scary times. Friends, our union was at stake, and we all felt the weight of that responsibility. But with calmness and cool heads and planning, we prevailed. We knew we would have to be better, more effective, that our members and locals would need us in new and profound ways. This also meant a solid financial plan for our union for 2020 and beyond. It meant bringing all the parts of our union together to act as one. It meant getting ahead of the big issues before they became bigger. It meant stepping up. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't do that. 2020 was hard on our union. We had 33,000 fewer dues-paying members. and sectors are still struggling. Members are still struggling. Many will never return to the same job. Despite all of these challenges, though, friends, I will say this: times of crisis are not the time to be complacent. It is the time to be bold and fierce and to win for workers. We must never let this kind of moment pass us by, and I believe we have not. We have fought and we have won on many fronts, and we must continue to fight for the kind of world that we all know is possible. There will be tough days ahead, but together we can push through those times by organizing and organizing. Even in the worst of times, whether it is a 7-month lockout under your stunning prairie skies or 15 months into a pandemic, we must always remember who we are. We are proud trade unionists, what we believe in, equality and justice, and what we can accomplish when we organize a better world for all workers. Friends, I want to end with something Gina Smoke said to me recently as I thanked her and her team for their inspired work this winter with Indigenous people, delivering blankets and hot food, literally saving lives. She responded, "It is heart work, Lana." Indeed, Sister Gina, it is. I think that pretty much describes the work of trade unionists everywhere in Unifor, including those who today walk a picket line, 3 lockouts and 2 strikes, members locked out in Chetwynd, BC, and Montreal, Quebec, and at Reliance Home Comfort all across Ontario, to our members on strike at Nestle in Toronto and Ocean Concrete in Victoria. Please send them your solidarity. It is the work of our hearts, the pursuit of worker justice. When Kevin, Nathan, Avery, Carla, and the incredible executive and membership of 594 waged their fight this past year, it too was the work of our hearts. Never forget that, sisters and brothers. When we engage our hearts, we can build our union and the better world we all know is possible. All my love and solidarity, and please be safe.